Ladies and gentlemen, I have Dr. Jodi Magness joining me today on MythVision for the first time. She is an expert when it comes to archaeology, and she has a course that she's doing with BART EHRMAN on archaeology in the time of Jesus. Welcome to MythVision.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you giving us your time. I'm not going to waste any time. I want everyone to know there's a 4-lecture course. Go sign up right now in the description. It helps the channel out as well. I'm an affiliate of BART's, and so if you want to help support the channel, you can get a course and you're helping the channel out at the same time. And this 4 lectures, can you briefly describe what we're going to go into?
Sure. So the first lecture is Jesus in Galilee. So I'm going to start out by talking about Nazareth, and there's actually archaeologically not a lot to say about Nazareth, but that's also interesting why that is the case. So I will mention that. Then I'll turn to Sepphoris, which you mentioned, and talk about that in relation to Jesus and Nazareth. And then I will talk about Capernaum and Magdala, or the hometown of Mary Magdalene, modern Migdal, focusing particularly on the synagogues. Because of course there's a famous synagogue at Capernaum, and a story of the synagogue that the centurion built, mentioned in the Gospel of Luke. And so I will be talking about the synagogue at Capernaum, also the synagogue at Migdal, and what we know about what synagogues looked like in the time of Jesus. Qumran is the site where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. So I'm going to talk mostly about the Dead Sea Scrolls, which I think most people think have something to do with Jesus, but they don't actually. But I'm pretty sure most people have heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but may not understand exactly what they are and why they're important. And so I will talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls and what connection, if any, they might have with Jesus. And then the third lecture is on Jesus in Jerusalem. And in an hour, which the lectures are only an hour, I don't have time to cover nearly everything, but I will focus especially on the area of the Temple Mount and some of the monuments mentioned in the gospel accounts in connection with Jesus's final days in Jerusalem. And then in the fourth lecture, I'll be talking about the deaths and burials of Jesus and James, and they are combining the archaeological evidence with the gospel accounts and seeing what that tells us.
Thank you so much. Again, link is in the description. My first question to you, Dr. Magness, is, did Nazareth, a place called Nazareth, really exist? I understand that we can go to this region and find that there were settlements here, there were people who lived here at some point, but it's almost like some online, in my world, I deal with an online crowd. Sometimes they're kissing the academic world, and sometimes I feel like there's 2 different worlds happening, and a lot of the academics have no clue what is like a pretty popular thing online, and that is Nazareth didn't exist. Online mythicists often will say Jesus didn't exist, which that's a different question than Nazareth. But as far as Nazareth existing, well, the gospel authors and later Christians just pinned the tail on the donkey somewhere in the region of Galilee, and then they finally named this place Nazareth. In your expert archaeological adventures, so to speak, and scholarly research, how can we approach this and give a pretty clear answer on saying, yeah, there's a place here and it was called Nazareth?
Right. So it's funny, I'm laughing because this isn't like a big debate among archaeologists, I have to say. But I know that you're looking for a smoking gun. So let me explain. There is no smoking gun here. But what I need to do is explain the methodology, right? And so basically, what you would want, I know what you or your audience or whatever would want, is an authentic ancient inscription from the time of Jesus found in excavations in what is today Nazareth that says, this is Nazareth, right? That's what you want, right? Nazareth is here. We don't have that. And so the way that this works, and it's not just in the case of Nazareth, this is for a lot of sites. The way that it works is that we usually rely on basically continuity of settlement. Meaning that if we have a settlement that has been known by a certain name throughout time, then you kind of just take it backwards from there. So it isn't really until we get to the 3rd, 4th centuries AD that we have Christian writers who place Nazareth in the spot. It's not an inscription, but they actually say Nazareth is located in this particular spot, and that's where modern Nazareth is located. And so, the place has been known as Nazareth, right? And pretty much continuously occupied since that time. Going back further than that, right? We don't have that smoking gun. But I will say that this again is true of a lot of sites, which is why this is kind of a non-issue among archaeologists. So to give you an example of Jerusalem, right? I have a book coming out on Jerusalem, by the way, little plug, but to give you an example of Jerusalem. So Jerusalem has been continuously inhabited for 5,000 years, but we don't have any inscriptions from Jerusalem that say this is Jerusalem until hundreds, if not thousands of years until after it was first settled. Nevertheless, I don't think anybody doubts that the ancient remains that we have from thousands of years ago are Jerusalem. Now, we have references in Egyptian sources of the Middle and Late Bronze Age to Jerusalem, not exactly that same name, but the Egyptian form, which indicates that Jerusalem was inhabited already in the Middle Bronze Age and the Late Bronze Age, and we have archaeological remains, but there's nothing in the city of Jerusalem itself at that very early date that says this is Jerusalem, right? So the same principle applies to many different places, right? Many different sites. And so basically what we're doing is relying on the continuity of settlement, that the place has been known by that name. Since then, it was already inhabited, before that time. And so presumably that was its name. And in fact, when the modern, even before actually the modern state of Israel was established, but when, archaeological exploration began in the Holy Land, a lot of sites were known by their Arabic names. And subsequently, when the state of Israel was established, the Hebrew names were then given back to some of these sites. But in many cases, the Arabic names preserved the name, the original Hebrew or whatever name it was, right? So a lot of times that was actually preserved in, through the centuries. And so actually it's pretty common for the site name to have remained essentially the same, even in different languages, as long as occupation was continuous throughout time. You generally don't find a site where, you get this big name change all of a sudden, as long as occupation is continuous. My own site that I'm excavating in Galilee, Hukok, by the Middle Ages came to be known as Yakuk. That's the Arabic name. Hukok is the biblical name, Yakuk. So Yakuk Hukok. So you see this kind of, that kind of a thing happening over and over. So again, I'm laughing because it's not really something that archaeologists debate, this Nazareth thing. Yeah.
Wow. I love the way you worded that. And in fact, thank you for explaining how archaeologists might work using sources or external from the sites to help navigate. Then you have to ask other questions, right? Why are you so suspicious of this not being the name? Like, what are the motivations? And of course, you get the online skeptics that oftentimes gravitate to videos that I do, which I'm very skeptical. And I feel like they're hyper skeptics. They go overboard, not granting anything. So I see no problem with anything you're saying at all. I'm just pointing out for the online audience, you are an archaeologist, and it's good to hear what you have to say there. What about the Netzer thing? As far as your field is archaeology, and then you have these, textual critics and scholars who come in and go, well, what's this? He's a Nazarene. He's from Nazareth. Is Netzer the root? What's going on? And this coming from the prophets? Or how do we tie it in? Do you think there is some tie-in between the name of the place and him being called a Nazarene?
I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. I just would assume that he's, called after the place that he was from, right? That also is very common in antiquity, including in the Roman period, that, you're called a name from such and such a place. Again, I don't see any big problems with it. But, regarding the skeptical thing. So look, I'm a skeptic, not about this stuff. But I am a skeptic in the sense that I always like to see the evidence, right? I want to see what is the evidence. So I think it's not a bad thing to ask what the evidence is, realizing that for the ancient world, our sources are extremely incomplete. In fact, we're missing most of the information. So we're trying to fill in huge gaps in our knowledge. And that makes it possible for a lot of speculation. And it's sometimes you just can't say for sure that the speculation is incorrect. You just have to say, well, it's possible, but the body of evidence that we have does not necessarily support that particular point of view. So it's a matter of taking the all of the evidence that we have, putting it together, realizing that it is incomplete, and then saying that the evidence that we have supports a particular interpretation or point of view, while not necessarily being able to absolutely rule out other interpretations or points of view. And that happens a lot. People think that archaeology, because archaeology is a science, by the way, but people think that archaeology is objective. Well, there is no such thing. Archaeology, just like all other sciences, by the way, is all about interpretation. You take the evidence and you interpret it. Mm-hmm. And that's why archaeologists disagree with each other. We don't all agree. In fact, we disagree a lot with each other. And that's because you can take the same evidence and interpret it different ways.
And then one brief mention on Sepphoris. I'm sure we'll learn more in your course. I visited there. I loved the art on many of the floors, and we went up and saw the synagogue home at the top of the hill, and then of course the synagogue that was down with the mosaics and the zodiac on the floor. That was beautiful. I used to be a Christian. I used to be a fundamentalist, if you will. You can see why I'm disenfranchised in some ways with those kind of interpretations. But while I was there, I had a deep appreciation looking across the field with Dr. James Tabor. We were hanging out, and he's taking us on a tour. And I looked, and he's like far out there, but walking distance, you can see where you're seeing where Nazareth begins. And it made me think about this guy, Jesus, looking for work as a young man who might have come over here and laid a few stones as a tecton.
Yes.
And I don't, there's something about it. I don't know. What are your 2 cents on Sepphoris and its relation to Nazareth and the idea of Jesus walking over there to get some work?
Right. Well, I'm actually going to be talking about that in my
Then don't tease us.
I'm not going to give that away, but that is actually the main thing. I won't be talking about all that other stuff that you mentioned at Sepphoris for a reason I will explain in the lecture, but yeah, I will be addressing exactly that, because that's been the subject of a lot of speculation also, due to the proximity of Nazareth to Sepphoris.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
So I didn't answer your question, but I'm being
you know what?
Here.
You will answer it in the course, and that's what matters.
Yeah.
So at least people can get an idea of where I was going, and then they go, I want to know.
Yeah.
Let's shift over to Jerusalem for just a moment, because I'm going to lay out a little something, and then I'd love for you to just take me on the journey. You can educate me on this archaeological stuff. Friends with Jonathan Adler and other archaeologists and stuff. And I wrestle between, when I hear I say harder evidence, because you're dealing with actual on the ground what's happening. And then I look at the text and I wonder what's going on with the text. And there are many scholars with different hypotheses. BART EHRMAN, who will be hosting your courses, thinks that the empty tomb is legend, that it's narrative legend. Doesn't mean that he doesn't think that maybe the authors might line up with the reality, the verisimilitude of what's on the ground in some way, but they're crafting narrative. And then you have friends of mine like Richard C. Miller. And Richard C. Miller has shown like this long-standing translation trope that's in Greek and Roman literature, where people's bodies go missing, and that's part of the narrative, in order to convince you they are a god, a demigod, a god, a hero. They've become divine. And I see that happening with Jesus in the Gospels. And then I see this tomb, and people ask me all the time, Derek, do you think the empty tomb was historical? Of course, the number one always wanting to know what your thoughts are kind of thing. And I go, I don't know. I don't know if there really was a historical empty tomb, and I don't know if it's completely literary and legendary. But if it was historical, if we play in the sandbox for a second, and, I, as a naturalist, were to hypothesize, I could see either misplacement where they don't know which tomb it was and then they go to an empty one, or someone actually did move the body, take it out. Did the disciples do it? We see this accusation, of course, claiming that Jews are saying this in Matthew. Anyway, I'm taking you down a rabbit trail to kind of get my thinking, and then you can take us from what you know archaeologically. At the very least, while we can't prove whether there really was or if this is just completely literary, as an archaeologist, does the archaeology match the description? And I'm sure you're going to go in more depth, but is there something you can tease us without giving away the course on something that helps us understand?
Yeah, I will say, and I will show why in my talk. But I do think that when you read the gospel accounts of Jesus's death and burial, and particularly the synoptic accounts, that the description is largely consistent with what we know about how wealthy Jews in Jerusalem disposed of their dead in the time of Jesus. And what I mean is like a wealthy Jew like Joseph of Arimathea. How would somebody like that have, what would they have done with a dead body, right? A corpse. The description that we have in the gospel accounts is really pretty consistent with the archaeological evidence. Now, let me clarify and say that this consistency does not in any way prove that the gospel accounts are historical. It doesn't prove that this episode actually occurred. But what it does mean is that whatever the source or sources were for that particular episode, that they were familiar with how wealthy Jews in Jerusalem disposed of their dead. And I also think, and this I'll talk about in the lecture, that there are the observance of a couple of biblical Jewish laws explain the peculiar episode of Joseph of Arimathea taking Jesus's body and placing it in his family's tomb. So that's something that I will also go into. Now, as far as the empty tomb goes, I don't know that I have any, particular feelings or light to shed on that. I do point out that the concerns with biblical law that underlies the episode is the sort of ideal of burying someone within 24 hours of death. But there's nothing in Jewish law that prohibits removing a body from a tomb or a grave once it's been placed there and reburying it elsewhere. So what I'm trying to say is that Jewish law would not have prohibited somebody taking Jesus's body from the tomb where he had been laid and then reburying it. And if that happened, I do think that there is a good reason why it would have happened. But, my goal is not to sort of undermine anybody's, personal beliefs or faith. So if people want to believe that, the tomb was empty because Jesus was resurrected, that's fine. But I do think that if you're looking for an explanation about why the body wasn't there and you don't have a theological, dog in the fight, then you can also explain it in a very rational way. So,
If I may on that, do you tell us in your course that rational way?
Yes.
Okay, then you have to sign up if you want to know, because that's my kind of thinking, and I'm with you. I'm not here to pop everyone's bubble. I'm trying, but I must admit, I do want to make people smarter. I want them to be better educated. So faith is faith, right?
Right.
Substance of things hoped for, evidence of things not seen. You have a faith, that's a different thing than, but I want to get to what I think is the case for me. And of course, I don't even factor in faith anymore as the option. It's more like, okay, what really happened here? And so I'm that kind of guy. And I really appreciate you. This is something that if anyone's like that, like what I'm describing, I imagine they'll enjoy this course.
Yeah. I mean, I always say, look, my goal, this is also in teaching my students, my goal is to educate and inform. And beyond that, what people choose to believe is their personal faith is up to them. Yeah.
And I agree. Now, if it's something that's harmful, we might need to talk, but
I'm not the thought police. So,
I know. I'm just saying if it's affecting, I like to confront some of the ideas that affected me negatively. It's almost like I'm trying to help harm prevention or something, others won't have to go through it. But everybody could sign up for the course. The link is in the description. You can help our channel out also by signing up through that link. Anything else you'd like to add or final words from you?
No, I thank you for interviewing me, and I hope that people will tune in for the lectures.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jodi Magness. Everybody, check out the course.
Thank you.